Hi again. In Kenneth Latourette, A History of Christianity, the chapter Earthen Vessels, the Exceeding Greatness of the Power. On page 238, he has the subhead, Yet no attempt was made to reshape civilization. So he's already recounted in the first 3 pages of this chapter the immense effect Christianity had, even by 300 AD. Maybe 10% of the Roman Empire was already Christian, nominally. What is going to be the net effect of Christianity if this thing is allowed to grow? And it did, of course, grow. And yet, as he points out here, Latourette points out, yet no attempt was made to reshape civilization. Well, that, of course, will somewhat change after Constantine, but gradually. In addition to the effects which we have already noted, there were others which must be taken into account if anything like satisfactory answers are to be given to the questions which we have propounded. It is significant that no thoroughgoing remaking of Greco-Roman society was achieved. Indeed, none was attempted. For the first 2 centuries, Christians constituted a small minority. At the outset, many of them expected the early visible return of their Lord, bringing with him the abrupt end of history. For several generations, as we have seen, substantial numbers of Christians continued to reassert that hope. For the most part, the Church was concerned for the salvation of the individual. It sought to gather these individuals into its fellowship, and it constituted a community, divided, to be sure, but fairly distinct from the world about it. Their critics charged Christians with being enemies of society, but Christian apologists protested the loyalty of their co-believers to the empire. Tertullian, for instance, declared that Christians regarded the existence of the Roman Empire as a bulwark against chaos, and held that God had appointed the emperors, and that, as commanded by the New Testament, Christians prayed for their temporal rulers, the emperors and their ministers, and even for those who persecuted them. Against those who charged Christians and their neglect of the gods with the responsibility for the ills which were overtaking society, Tertullian boldly insisted that because of its sins, the human race had always deserved ill at God's hands, that God's judgments had brought misfortunes upon mankind in pre-Christian days, and that calamities had actually declined since the advent of Christianity. For, so he said, from that time onward, virtue had placed some restraint upon the wickedness of the world, and men had begun to pray for the averting of God's wrath. Christians were far from attempting the overthrow and reconstruction of Greco-Roman society. To be sure, they were attacking certain features of that society, its polytheism, its immoralities, its gladiatorial contests, the indecencies of its theater, its infanticide, and its sexual irregularities, but in doing so, they believed that they were conserving and not destroying the empire and its civilization. When, beginning with Constantine, the empire made its peace with the Church, it sought to control the latter and to use it as a bulwark against the mounting threats to the stability of the realm. In this, the leaders of the Church acquiesced. Indeed, when the sack of Rome by Alaric and his Goths in 410 made apparent the mortal weakness of the empire, Augustine stoutly declared that the presence of churches as sanctuaries and the Christian profession of some of the Goths had mitigated the disaster. With the numerical triumph of Christianity through the winning of the overwhelming majority of the population of the Roman Empire to the Christian faith, it might have seemed that the Church would at last undertake the reshaping of civilization. However, the emergence of monasticism served further to preclude even the formulation of such a program. The monks sought to withdraw from the world, and either to live completely apart from society, or to set up communities of their own, which would perfectly embody the Christian ideal. Although Christians did not attempt the complete remaking of Greco-Roman civilization, they attacked some of the constituent elements of the life about them, and in other ways their attitudes were in stark contrast with the culture in which they were immersed, and wrought not only negative but also positive changes in the Mediterranean world. Moreover, there was a striking difference between Greco-Roman civilization and the Roman state on the one hand, and on the other, the faith set forth in Christ and by his apostles. There were basic differences of values, which was deemed most worthwhile, and in conceptions of the nature and destiny of man, of the universe, of the course of history, and of power, between the kind of power seen in the cross and the resurrection, and that which formed and sustained the Roman Empire. These could scarcely be reconciled. Here, as in Judaism, the parable of Jesus of the new wine in old wineskins was pertinent, perhaps tragically so. In trying to put the one into the other, both might be lost. Now he has a subhead, the profound effect of the religious life, or rather the profound effect on the religious life. As was to be expected, Christianity had a profound effect upon the religious life of the Roman Empire and its people. Christian apologists devoted much of their energy to denouncing the pagan cults in which the empire abounded, and would have no compromise with them. As we have suggested, there was some carryover from paganism in the attitudes and practices of many Christians, but there was not the deliberate and easygoing syncretism which was so marked a feature of the contemporary religious life outside of Christianity and Judaism. The church was officially intransigent. It held that through itself alone was salvation, the true goal of human life, to be attained. By the year 500, the pagan cults had all but disappeared. They survived chiefly in backward rural districts and remote mountain valleys, or among the barbarian invaders. So sweeping a religious revolution had never before been seen in the Mediterranean world. It was not unique. It was later to be paralleled by the supplanting of religion, some of them higher than the paganism of the Roman Empire, by Islam, and by the elimination and absorption in most of India of Buddhism, also a high religion, by Hinduism. In other words, Buddhism being overtaken by popular Hinduism. Yet in some ways, the victory of Christianity was a more notable achievement than either of these. In contrast with Islam, the triumph of Christianity, which had really been won before Constantine espoused the faith, had been accomplished without the use of arms or the support of the state. And unlike the success of Hinduism in India as against Buddhism, it was not the resurgence of the hereditary religion against what the latter regarded as a heretical variant from itself. The religious effects of Christianity were not alone negative. The destruction of rival cults. Christianity contributed to new religious movements. It was a potent element in Manichaeism and in the various forms of Gnosticism. It may have had some influence on the rise and growth of Neoplatonism. Even more significant were the positive results in the conceptions of God and of human nature, in the kind of worship and in the quality of living which the victor produced. On the conceptions of God and of human nature and of the kind of worship associated with Christianity, we have already said as much as the limitations of our space will wisely permit. However, we must add something about the basic convictions concerning the relation of the Christian community to the society in which it was immersed, convictions concerning the goal of history, and the sort of behavior and character which issued from the religious beliefs of Christians. Here were tensions and reciprocal contradictions. While they were partially resolved, as Christian thinkers achieved an uneasy reconciliation, and as membership in the church came to be almost identical with citizenship in the empire, they never fully disappeared, but persisted, a source both of weakness and strength in the society with which Christianity had become associated. And his next subhead, of course, follows upon this, which is the tension between the early Christians and the world. Jacques Ellul has done a great deal of thinking about this period, this transition period, which, if you're coming from a cult background, you just assume is all bad. This transition period after the emergence of Constantine and the Nicene Council. Ellul is seen, being a Protestant, the Reformed perspective on this is vaguely negative, you could say, but but balanced in a way that it never is if you're coming from a cult background. He's written a series a series of essays in a book called The Subversion of Christianity, in which he deals quite extensively with this period of history. So I'll put in a link to the first of the videos on the subversion of Christianity. And there's maybe 5 or 6 or 7, I think, altogether, and they're linked. And I'll also put in a link to the playlist. There's the Jacques Ellul playlist, which involves more than just this one book, The Subversion of Christianity, but also his other terrific books in our basic Christian library list, including Propaganda and The Meaning of the City. See you soon.